So this is a video just kind of showing my post-processing process and steps I take to go from raw images to JPEG images. The program we're looking at right now is free with any Canon DSLR or EOS M. It is Digital Photo Professional. Um, and just looking at these pictures and kind of giving some background, I took an animal outside and tried to get some pictures. Animal wouldn't sit still, so I didn't get that many. I've just got these three rows plus that one. But one of the things that I did is I took a whole lot of very similar pictures. There's this one all the way to this one. They're all pretty similar. So what I want to do is go through, figure out which ones I like the best, process them, and see which ones I want to keep. So what I'll do is click this first one, press shift, click the last one, that selects all the ones in between, and then go up to quick check. Actually, before I do that, I'll show you a couple things here. This shows you that these are raw images, gives you the file name. CR2 is Canon RAW 2, it's their proprietary RAW file. Shows that these images were shot at f8. They were all at f8 because I was in aperture priority mode and didn't change the aperture, but the shutter speed was different based on various metering things that the camera was doing. I feel like the combination of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO was good for these, but I think these images got a little overexposed, and I'll address that later. So now that they're all selected, I'm going to go up here to quick check, click on that. I'm going to open this up to full screen size, and then because all the images are relatively similar in terms of the position of the animal itself, I really want to pick the one that has the best focus on the actual eye itself, because to me, out of focus eyes in a picture just kind of, it takes a lot of the impact away. So what I'm going to do is use this next button to kind of flow through and figure out which ones I like, which ones I don't. This one I definitely don't because I don't feel like it's in focus. That one, same thing, the eye is not in focus. This one's a different story. You can tell for sure that the eye is in focus. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually start off in 50% view where it's an even bigger view of it. So that's half the actual size of the image. So again, the first two, not good. Third one, much better. You can see the details in the eye, the pupil's nice and sharp. So this one I'm going to do a 4-star. And the reason I'm doing 4 stars is although the focus is really good and the scale detail is really good, if you go back to the normal view, I feel like it's a little overexposed, and I kind of mentioned that earlier. So back to the 50% view and on to the next one. A little blurry, relatively good, but I don't think it's any better than the other one that I starred. Blurry, pretty blurry, really blurry. That one's much better. I think this one is on par with the other one, if not maybe a little bit better in terms of the focus. And same thing here, a little overexposed on the outer edges. So back to 50% view, I'm going to 4-star this one. Go to the next image. Blurry. That one's relatively good, but the tongue sticking out, which normally I like, but in this case I didn't capture the tongue, frozen, and it's blurry. So I'm just going to pass on this one as well. So I'll close out these review windows because there's no more. The next button's grayed out. And that's all 11 images. I just went through all of them that fast. And what I decided was that I liked this one and I like this one. Normally what I would do is I would go ahead and delete the ones that I don't want and just say yes and get rid of them. But I may need to redo this video, so I'm going to keep them for now. So from here I'm going to go ahead and double click and open this up in the edit window. The last window was a preview window. This is an actual edit window. To start off with, you always want to make sure you have your tool palette handy because you cannot process these raw images without this tool palette. And then the second thing I like to do is to go ahead and do the trimming and angle adjustment. This is where I come if I want to change the angle of the picture itself and maybe give it a little more downward tilt, something like that. Maybe give the appearance that the animal's hanging from above. In this case, I don't want to do anything. I just want to leave it as it was. You can also rotate right. You can rotate left. And finally, you can crop the image. You can do it in a free form, which is the way that it's indicated now. It's got a free aspect ratio, or you can pick from a pre-selected aspect ratio. I always go with 3:2. The reason is because Canon pictures are already in a 3:2 format, so it keeps it consistent. So for this one, I feel like maybe the image is a little too left and up centered, so I want to crop it and get a little more pleasing presentation to it. So I think that looks a lot better. All we did was just trim off, you know, a little bit from the right and the bottom, and already there's a major difference. So that's how I'm going to save that. Now, processing the raw image, you've got 4 tabs up here. The majority of the work is here in the raw tab. I mentioned before that I felt like it was a little overexposed. Cropping off those outermost edges actually helped a lot. So I think we only really need to, you know, decrease the brightness. Maybe that's just 2 notches down, which is a third of a stop. So I think that looks good. In terms of white balance, you can adjust that here. You cannot adjust the white balance for a JPEG using this software. You would have to use something like Photoshop. In this case, I don't feel like we need to adjust the white balance. I think the camera got it right the first time. But if I wanted to, I've got my little click white drop if I had a white balance card to pull a recipe from. Or I can do one of the automatic ones. So again, in this case, I'm going to stick with auto. Picture styles, these are basically just different color profiles and sharpening settings, etc. that the camera already has preloaded. And you can also download more from the Canon website and load them right here into Digital Photo Professional and make this list really long. For my animals, I always stick to faithful. If I'm shooting something like, you know, my family out and about, or just, you know, people at a party, or you know, varied scenes, I'll choose standard. If I'm taking pictures of people only, a lot of times I'll stick with portrait because it makes the skin tones more pleasing. If I'm out and about, you know, if I was out, you know, in the mountains taking pictures of trees and the sky and the mountains and lakes and things like that, I might choose landscape to kind of punch up the nature colors and make them more vibrant. But again, for this, oh, and you've got black and white down here as well. Again, for this, I really want to stick to the colors that are most natural, so I'm going with faithful. Now here are a bunch of different sliders that do a bunch of different things. You can increase the contrast, you can decrease the contrast. There's the baseline. For me personally, I feel like Canon overdoes the contrast in the camera just a little bit. So I'm going to knock it back by about 2 notches, and I think this looks more accurate for the animal. For the highlights, the highlights are the bright areas of the image. I feel like we don't need to increase the highlights by any means and make them brighter, because I already said, you know, we knocked back the brightness because it was a little too much already. But I also don't feel like we need to subtract the highlights away. I feel like we've got a good balance there. The camera did a good job with the highlights. The shadow is the same thing. It just applies to the dark areas of the picture. So if you watch this shadow area here, when I move this slider, you see that shadow getting lighter, and you can also make it darker. And really it doesn't only impact shadows, it impacts the dark areas of the picture. So in this case, again, I think the camera did a good job. There's no need to adjust it. There have been cases where I've taken pictures where I did need to lighten shadows because maybe the eye cast a shadow onto the snake and it just didn't look very good, and I wanted to lighten it up. Color tone, sliding to the left makes it more red, sliding to the right makes it more green. I think this one looks exactly as it should right in the middle, but there are cases if the camera just doesn't capture it correctly where you do need to do that. Color saturation to the left is less intense, to the right is more intense. This is where people play if they're dishonest. They move the slider all the way over here, or even just a notch or two. And if it doesn't represent what the animal actually looks like, you're doing yourself and your animals and potential customers a disservice. In this case, I think the camera got it right. Again, the color saturation looks just as it should, so I'm going to leave it alone. Now it's time to sharpen the image. Again, if we kind of blow this up to 50% view, you know, the pupil, it already has some good sharpness to it, but there's a lot more to be had. So what I'm going to do is change this from unsharp mask, which I do use on occasion, but in this case I just want to make it easy using just the sharpness slider by itself. It's easier and gives very similar results. When I'm being picky, I'll use unsharp mask. So for sharpness, I usually go up to 5 with this lens, and you can instantly see that there's a big difference in the sharpness of the details around the eye. In fact, that might be a little too much. I'm going to dial that down to 4 just to kind of take some of the punch out of it. I'm going to go back to fit to window, and then we're going to move on to a different tab. I'll go to the RGB tab. This is the tab you would use to process a JPEG image. Again, you've got brightness, contrast, hue, and saturation, but you don't have some of those others, and changing these parameters it's not as forgiving in a JPEG image as it is in a RAW file. Just little changes here can make a huge difference. Now with sharpness, this is why I came to this tab. I wanted to dial it up just a little bit more. I've gone as high as say 200 with this, maybe 225. In this case, again, the image is already really sharp, so I'm just going to stick to maybe 120. I feel like that's a pretty good balance. There's another tab up here, noise reduction. This image was shot at ISO 100. We don't need noise reduction because there's not any noise in the picture. If I had shot at a higher ISO, say 3200, I might need to apply a little more liberal amount of noise reduction to kind of smooth out the details. As far as the lens corrections go, I do peripheral illumination corrections in camera. Chromatic aberration, color blur, and distortion I can do here. This lens is pretty awesome, so it doesn't need it, but just to show you how it works, this is how you do it. You click tune, and then you just come here, chromatic aberration, color blur, and distortion, and OK, and it just does all that work for you. You won't notice much of a change with this because again, there's not much to fix. On other lenses you can notice a huge difference. So that's pretty much everything in terms of how to process these images. I want to show you a few more things. First is, how would you save just a single image? You go to File, Convert and Save. Do your image quality at 10, because why else would you use a DSLR except to get the maximum image quality? And then you can resize to whatever you want. I always just go for width. I go 1200 if it's a landscape oriented picture. If it's a portrait oriented and it was turned the other way, I'll do anywhere between 600 and 1000 depending on where I'm outputting. If I'm printing, I do not resize at all. I keep all those pixels in there and I save the JPEG at full maximum size because I want as much detail as I can get. So that's what I would normally do, is resize 1200 and then save. In this case I'm going to cancel because I want to show you one other way to save. You can close this and all these settings are going to stay exactly the same without even having to save anything. It's just the way the program works. If I was to open this back up, you'll see it's still, negative a third of a stop there, -2 contrast, sharpness at 4, etc. In terms of another way to save, you can batch process images. Batch processing is for the same exact settings for more than one image. So if I was going to save 2 images, say these 2, I could do batch process, save it to the right folder, click resize, do whatever I wanted to do, say 1500 or whatever, and click execute. It would save both of those files to 1500 pixels. So that's the other way to save. Now, last thing I wanted to share was the idea of a recipe. You remember there was 2 pictures that I liked. 2 of them got 4 stars. This one has not been touched yet. This is the one we were playing with. What I want to do is I'm going to process this image identically to this one, except I don't want to go through all those steps. So I'm just going to right click, copy recipe to clipboard, right click on the next image, paste recipe, and then when we open this up, you can see all these changes are already there. We've got a -1/3 for brightness adjustment, -2 for contrast, 4 for sharpness, and the sharpness under JPEG is done too. It also did the lens aberrations corrections as well. So all that stuff's already done. I don't have to do it again. That's really useful when you want to do multiple images all the same. So like that, you just like that, and you just paste it to all of them. All those are now done in the exact same formula. Cool thing is you don't have to stick to that. You can kind of do like this, and if I say, hey, this one needs to be dialed back just a little bit more for brightness, you can continue to adjust it there. So it's not permanent. It's just a good starting point for you. So now both images are processed exactly the same, and I want to see which one of these I like better. That way I can go ahead and save it, and it'll be my particular picture from this series. So I'll do quick check again because all the processing is done. Actually, I do want to, with a recipe, it doesn't do the trimming and angle adjustment, so I want to do that real quick here. So I'm back at my 3:2 aspect ratio. I'm going to pull that out a little, and I'm much happier with that. So now I'm going to quick check these, and my video time's running short, so I'm going to make this quick. I've got this one, there's my next one, that one, that one. I really like this one because it's got a little more of the body, and this one kind of seems like a lot of no man's land, but some people like that, and it kind of isolates the head. But for my personal taste, I like the first one, so I'm just going to take this and I'm going to save it, and I'm going to put this in the thread so that you can see the final output.